introduce you just for the purpose of the recording. So this is our weekly with ID number 4. We're having a weekly ID number, a weekly Indivisible Durango Zoom session, at least until the election. Then after that, we'll figure out what we're going to do. But we felt like we needed to reconnect with people, and then this is the first one we're actually recording, so we'll have it available for people to listen to. For this week, we wanted to hear from some of our committees. So our Public Lands Committee facilitator, Clint McKnight, is going to give us a wonderful update on public lands. And then Gail Harriss, it's Gail Harriss and Sarah, I don't know if Sarah's around, but Gail Harriss from Environment Climate is going to give us an update from environment. And a lot of what we wanted to do was sort of connect it to the upcoming election so that we're more informed and we can inform other people. So we're not trying to preach to the choir, but just keeping us up to date and up to snuff. So anyway, Clint, take it away. And I've got your pictures on a PowerPoint, so we'll be showing those.
I'll let you know when it's time to bring them up.
Okay.
All right, great. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. This is the biggest gathering of unmasked people I've been involved in a long time. I'm not used to seeing so many mouths, you know? We'll actually see people's lips moving. It really helps. I didn't realize what a lip reader I am, but I think we're all learning that. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity, Deb, and all of you for what I wanted to do with my time today was just offer mostly an update on some of the issues that we have sent out calls to action on regarding public lands matters over the past approximately 12 months. So these are just updating on kind of what has transpired in the time since the calls to action and maybe how we have influenced these activities. The first one, I'm starting with a good news topic, which is the subject of oil and gas leasing near national parks in southern Utah. We sent out a CTA in July alerting Indivisible members that the BLM was planning a September oil and gas lease sale. And that's your cue, Deb, for that one. Thank you so much. I forgot to do that. That there was a big oil and gas lease sale in southern Utah adjacent to several national parks, including Canyonlands, Arches, and Capitol Reef, as well as Bears Ears National Monument. The total acreage in this planned lease was 87,000 acres, the largest in many years. And from our good friends at the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, we learned that Utah Governor Gary Herbert had in the past spoken out against leasing near national parks in Utah. So the idea was that let's get on the phone and call him and say, hey, will you do that again? Do that neat little trick again where you ask the BLM to stop leasing near some of the jewels of your state. I actually called Gary Herbert's office and talked to a very nice woman, you know, in the governor's office. She was as pleasant as she could be. She was just great. And maybe some of our members did the same, passing on the message to the governor. Who knows? As I said, in the past, he has spoken up against leasing outside parks like Zion National Park, Dinosaur National Monument, where I used to work many years ago, and Sand Flats Recreation Area. So that all happened, and next thing we know, the good news, on August 12th, we learned that the lease sale was being deferred for now. So yeah, good. So it's, you know, another fabulous temporary victory in the fight to protect public lands, but we'll take what we can get. And you know, who knows what happened behind the scenes? Who knows if the good governor actually did speak up for preserving his national parks? But I have to guess that market forces had something to do with the fact that this didn't go through. I drove by a gas station today where gas was selling for $2.04 a gallon, and that has to make a difference in these matters. Anyway, yeah, this is a terrible time to be leasing oil and gas with crashing oil prices and a global pandemic. So I don't know, one of the silver linings of these things is that there's not quite as much pressure to develop undeveloped, beautiful places like outside Utah National Parks. So that's the status on that. A good news story to begin with. I'm going to next jump to a recent issue that we actually sent this out as more of an informal. Yeah, thank you. This is this regards regulations for the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA regulations. Not everybody's real familiar with NEPA, but it's the most important regulation involving protection of our environment that you've probably never heard of. And we sent out an informal call to action just to our committee members regarding the Trump administration's plans. Well, they did. What they did was they gutted the National Environmental Policy Act. For more than 50 years, NEPA has ensured that both objective science and public input are part of any decision to disturb, develop, or otherwise industrialize our last wild places. And the Trump administration, in an effort to streamline projects, just cut the heart out of this policy that has done such a good job protecting public lands and other places for 50 years. Now, we have found that talking directly to Trump's management agencies hasn't borne much fruit. So what we thought we would do was just try to encourage folks to write letters to the editor or guest opinions to any of our local or statewide newspapers. And so in this item that Public Lands sent out, we suggested talking points that people could use. And I gave contact information for newspapers and other media outlets throughout the state. As the facilitator for Public Lands, I wrote up a guest opinion and sent it to both the Denver Post and Durango Herald, but neither paper has run it yet as far as I know. Truth be told, it's not a sexy issue. It's a little on the dull side. It's important as hell, but it's not as I don't know, not as glamorous as reintroducing wolves or protecting wilderness. It's the arcane business of the public having a voice in management decisions and objective science being honored in those decisions as well. And I don't know, but anyway, at least what I wrote hasn't appeared as far as I know. And why is this so important? Well, it's important because BLM right now is bull rushing a far-reaching set of overlapping initiatives to expedite the removal of native forests and sagebrush shrublands on millions of acres across the Intermountain West. It's a really, literally, if you looked at a map of the lands that BLM wants to remove native pinyon juniper woodlands, it's every state in the West. And by gutting NEPA regulations, they're green-lighted to just go ahead and do these things without any public oversight or objective science being considered. So that's the context of the ramifications of what could happen with NEPA being so diminished in its oversight powers. I wrote up all this stuff here. I could read about it, and I don't know how much you want to hear about it. But let me just say that NEPA is not, strictly speaking, an environmental conservation legislation like the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act is intended to ensure that water stays clean. NEPA is not intended to ensure that anything happens other than the public has input and that science is honored in the decision making. So it's really very objective. It's not a Green New Deal thing at all. It's one of the most straightforward bits of public involvement in what goes on in our world that there could be. But of course, the lawsuits have been filed in reaction to the gutting of NEPA. And immediately after the Trump administration changed the nature of it, several environmental and civil rights organizations filed a lawsuit against the Council on Environmental Quality, which is a division of the Executive Office of the President, for gutting NEPA. And I'll just briefly read here what is going on there. Also, the Southern Environmental Law Center filed a complaint with the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Virginia, asking that the new regulations be set aside because the Trump administration has disregarded the interests of the citizens, businesses, and industries that depend on full and complete NEPA analysis, and turned the mandatory public engagement process into a paper exercise rather than the meaningful inquiry the law requires. So, yes, good organizations are standing up to challenge what has happened to gut this important regulation. And as so many of the things I'm going to briefly talk about today, everything depends on the election coming up, right? I mean, this situation, right here regarding NEPA could change like that if we can turn this train wreck around in November. The third item I want to briefly talk about is, well, I saw a thing from Representative Scott Tipton. Yes, thank you, Deb, excellent. Where right now, here, let me back up. Currently, there are no less than 3 separate wilderness proposals for the state of Colorado. There's the wilderness bill by Michael Bennett and Joe Neguse, the Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy Act. I may have just mangled that name, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that's right. Representative Diana DeJette has a Colorado Wilderness Act. And then Scott Tipton came out with the worst of the bunch, what he called the Colorado Rec Act. And that's REC, but it might as well be RWRECK, because mostly what his proposal does is actually remove wilderness study areas from our local area here in Southwest Colorado from being managed as de facto wilderness. And it's a paper tiger. It's nothing. He's just trying to pretend to be interested in preserving wilderness. But and Diana DeJette's Colorado Wilderness Act, if I'm pronouncing her name right, hers is terrific. It's part of a much bigger effort, though, that just honestly may not get very far. I attended an open house that she gave in Cortez, and she's wonderful, and I wish it the best. But of the 3, really, the one that has the most potential for being enacted is the core proposal by Bennett and Neguse. Let me just briefly say that their proposal, the Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy Act, would protect approximately 400,000 acres of public land, establishing new wilderness areas and safeguarding existing outdoor recreation areas. CORE unites and improves upon 4 previously introduced bills, including the San Juan Mountains Wilderness Act. And this effort has been in the works for over a decade, and it has the support of a broad range of people, not just greeny tree huggers like me, but all kinds of county commissioners and businesses and just plain folks across the state. Bennett and Neguse have done a great job of bringing people on board this effort, but of course, Scott Tipton's not on board, and neither is Corey Gardner. But we'll speak about him later, right? So, what we asked folks to do in our call to action was to simply contact Scott Tipton and tell him to drop his weak wilderness proposal and find a way to work with Bennett and Neguse on the CORE Act, which has so much greater impact for preserving the beautiful landscape that we love. So, who knows, right? Scott's a lame duck now, right? Isn't he? So he's sort of, he and his proposal are probably out of the picture. The important thing is what's going on with CORE. And lately, Senator Bennett and Congressman Neguse have been going around the state and talking it up and trying to get more support. Just this past week, they met with a group of veterans and state and federal officials near Dillon, Colorado, along with Representative Jason Crow, talking about how the CORE Act, they're trying to get CORE included in the final fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, which is currently being negotiated in Congress. And the reason it makes sense to squeeze it into that legislation is part of what CORE would do is create the first of its kind national historic landscape to honor Camp Hale, the training ground of the famed 10th Mountain Division, which saw action in World War II. So there's that aspect to that proposal. And at this recent gathering near Dillon, Michael Bennett said, the biggest issue right now is that there are people in the Senate that still don't believe in public lands and who don't want to recognize or acknowledge the consensus that's been forged in Colorado around this piece of legislation. That's a pitfall, Michael said. But I do think that if we don't get it done at the end of this year, I feel very good that we'll be able to get it done in the first part of next year. The reason for that is the support here is so broad all across the Western Slope. So, we're kind of hamstrung with the way the Senate is right now. Hopefully, again, that can change in the not too distant future. And hopefully the future of the CORE Act will be brighter then when that happens. The next issue I want to talk about is a call to action we sent out regarding our tribal neighbors in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I don't know about you guys, but I have come to feel a very strong kinship with the Native people who live in this area through my understanding and support for Bears Ears National Monument. It's been an education for me that I'm very grateful for. It's not one I had just a few years ago, but as part of my education, I feel I don't know, more of a appreciation for the people that live all around us. And of course, the coronavirus pandemic and economic shutdown has been especially hard on our tribal neighbors. So we put out a CTA encouraging folks to support the Navajo, Hopi, Ute Mountain Ute, Ute, and Zuni peoples, by making donations to various programs that are working with these folks to help them through the hard times that are going on all the reservations around us. One of the groups that I'm a big fan of, Utah Dene Bekaya, has a program called Seeds and Sheep, which they described as a community organized mutual aid effort to supply elders, individuals, and families with food, water, firewood, and other essentials, including food for pets and livestock. And the Seeds and Sheep program helped ensure that, that these folks get what they need during these trying times. So, maybe some donations were made in the wake of that call to action. But the situation now, as I look into it, is that the Seeds and Sheep program has been discontinued, and their website says thank you to everyone who participated. I'm going to assume that means there was some, good things that happened through it, and they felt the need it was okay to discontinue it. There are other aid opportunities still going on in the local reservation, such as the Pueblo Relief Fund and the Bluff Area Mutual Aid. And they are still very much actively seeking donations and support for their tribal communities. The Navajo Department of Health, just recently on September 1st, has reported that the percentage of COVID-19 tests which are positive on the reservation is now less than 10%, and hospitalization capacity remains below the 80% threshold That still doesn't sound very good. And so the impression I got is that maybe things have quieted down a bit, but the Navajo Department of Health is still extending the 32-hour weekend lockdowns on the reservation through the end of this month. And Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez says, as long as there is no vaccine available, there will remain substantial risk of contracting COVID-19, and we have to keep doing everything we can to prevent the spread of the virus. So our friends on the Navajo Nation and other local areas are still dealing with a tough situation. And
Clint, can I interrupt a second? Since I listen into the health department briefings every week, so there's, I think if I have this right, the number of positive cases on the Navajo reservation was 9,903, which was an increase of 73 in the past week, and 527 people have died, which is an increase of 24 from the last week.
Okay. Thank you for that, Debbie. And I was thinking of you as I was reading this because I had a feeling that you might have better information than I do. And in fact, I wanted to make that as a disclaimer before I even started, that everything I'm talking about here is just to the best of my knowledge. And believe me, that's a scattershot at best. Just whatever it is I'm able to find out that's going on with these issues. And some of you may know better than I do or different than I do, and please feel free to jump in to help us all out anytime during this presentation. The next thing I'll talk about, I've got two more items, and this is a recent one, and this relates to, gosh, look at that. This relates to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And look at this extraordinary photo. I mean, you know, we've been hearing about the Arctic Refuge, you guys and me, you know, for over 30 years, you know, all our lives pretty much, you know, our adult lives. And what we always hear is about the extraordinary porcupine caribou herd. And this is it. I mean, look at that. That's an extraordinary scene. Look at the distance. I mean, they're just innumerable, these creatures. This is a scene out of North America's prehistory. You know, we hear about what it was like when the bison roamed the Central Plains, the grasslands there, that there were so many you couldn't count them, and it breaks our hearts to know that we missed that and that's gone. But here, on the coastal plain of the Arctic Refuge, that scene still exists with caribou. What an extraordinary thing. I mean, it gives me chills to think of that and to even look at this scene. So, but yet the world is the way it is. And recently, on August 17th, the Trump administration issued its final plan to open up part of the refuge coastal plain to oil and gas development. The Department of the Interior said that it completed its required reviews and the BLM can begin to auction off drilling leases. Interior Secretary David Bernhardt said, "I believe there could be a lease sale by the end of the year." Let me step back just a moment and say that while I personally, and many of us, have known of this place as a wonderful wildlife refuge, recently we've come to understand it as the very important homeland to the native Gwich'in people as well. Some of you saw the short documentary film, Welcome to Gwich'in G, that we screened at Indivisible's last big meeting, that introduced us to native life there above the Arctic Circle and the people who depend upon this landscape and on the caribou and everything else that lives there for their culture and their livelihoods. So that's obviously just another reason to continue to fight for this place. Like every other issue we've touched on today, ANWR's fate and that of the people and wildlife which depend on it may ultimately hinge on the results of the upcoming election. You know, this has been going on for decades, of course, and environmental groups and Gwich'in representatives have traveled to New York City just last year, and in an effort to convince some of the major banks, such as Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, and Wells Fargo, trying to encourage them not to directly finance any oil and gas drilling in Anwar. And all those banks have agreed to that, except for one, which you may know about, Bank of America. Bank of America has not agreed to rule out funding for drilling in Anwar. So if ever you feel like giving Bank of America a phone call and a piece of your mind, I think that would be pretty awesome. You know, let me say though, of course, these things get, even if oil companies do decide to purchase leases, that is still only the first step in a very long, uncertain process. David Hayes, who served as Deputy Interior Secretary under President Barack Obama, says there are a lot of tripwires for any of those leaseholders ahead. Anyone buying an energy development lease in Anwar is buying years of litigation along with it, of course. And of course, that litigation did not take long to materialize as soon as the announcement from the Trump administration was made. The Gwich'in Steering Committee, along with several conservation groups, immediately sued the Trump administration. And in a separate lawsuit, the National Audubon Society and other wildlife groups also argued that the Department of the Interior broke several federal laws in approving the leasing plan. One of these actions, National Audubon Society versus Bernhard, was filed in the United States District Court for the District of Alaska. It argues that the Department of the Interior failed to comply with the National Wildlife Refuge System Administration Act, page 2, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Alaska National Interests Land Conservation Act, the Wilderness Act, and the Endangered Species Act. And finally, I'll conclude with Natalie Dawson, Executive Director and Vice President of Audubon Alaska, said, the Department of Interior blocked scientific review, dismantled its own agency process, and ignored the concerns of indigenous peoples from across the Arctic to pander to politicians who have close ties to North Slope oil companies. Alaskans will not be duped into thinking oil and gas from the Arctic refuge is a path to prosperity. So, once again, good folks just like you and me are rising up to challenge these terrible decisions in court, and hopefully, certainly tying them up until we can get better people in charge. Okay, lastly, I hope I'm not going over time here, Deb. How am I doing? Okay, still okay?
I'm fine, sorry, you're fine. I think we're okay, and then we just need to decide if we want to do questions at the end or in between.
Okay.
So
okay.
Gail, you let me know.
All right. You know, the last thing I'm going to mention here is I'm so sorry that Sally is not here today. Sally Stein is not here today because she was the instigator of this last CTA that we put together. And this regards Cory Gardner's phony efforts at painting himself as a conservationist, as opposed to the platform that Hickenlooper has been talking about in that race that we desperately need to win. So Public Lands Committee put out a CTA asking indivisible members to help expose Gardner's bogus conservation claims, and even more importantly, throw our active support behind the campaign of John Hickenlooper. Sally contacted me. She's so great. She's got several friends among the Democratic Party in Denver who are telling her that that ex-Governor Hickenlooper was kind of being a lackluster candidate and was not really getting out there and not selling himself the way they thought he should. And the feeling was that his candidacy was in real trouble. And so that, you know, maybe we need to start, you know, getting involved and trying to give him a boost in some way. So we suggested that our members write letters to the editor clarifying Gardner's awful conservation record. And I wrote down several things about, you know, his record, and you don't need to hear them from me. You know what Cory Gardner's been about. I mean, we all pay attention to these things, and just because he supported the Land and Water Conservation Act, and now thinks he can wear hiking boots and have pictures taken in a forest, and that's what he's all about. We know that that's bogus. Now, our old friend John Hickenlooper is nobody's ideal idea of a conservation candidate. I mean, he was very much a middle-of-the-road governor, and he made a lot of decisions that I certainly would not have supported. But compared to Cory Gardner, you know, he's the only way to go. And I don't know, I kind of think he's coming around on a lot of things. He's certainly making statements that suggest he's going to be a much more conservation and public-oriented senator and public lands defender in that office, as opposed to being the governor. Anyway, what did I write down here? I've got everything written out here. I could be just reading this and not be stumbling around, but I somehow can't even do that. So anyway, I know that Hickenlooper is probably none of your favorites either, but he is the horse we got to ride, and I think he's going to do a good job for us, because he said things like he's going to fight the shrinking of Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante. Okay, good, that sounds good. And he also says we must support the conservation of large unbroken blocks of high quality habitat across vast landscapes. That's quite a statement. I like the way that sounds. That sounds like something that would be good for caribou and other living creatures. And he's received some endorsements that have to be acknowledged, such as National Resources Defense Council, the League of Conservation Voters, and the Sierra Club. I think it's going to be a tight race with him and Cory Gardner. You know, the last information I could find from a consulting group called Morning Consult, and this is toward the end of July, shows that Hickenlooper is ahead by 6 points over Gardner, which doesn't sound like a lot. But he's ahead, more significantly, he's ahead by 13 points among independents. And so, I don't know. I think it's going to be a tough race, and that's why I hope that we can, I don't know, do what we can to push this guy over the line, because the world will look much better if we can obviously win that seat and obviously win the Senate, as well as everything else we're going to try to win. I think Gail will deal with those issues better than I have, but that's all I've got. I did look into seeing if there was anything to say about Bears Ears. I can't find anything very interesting other than documents of legalese that I could read, and it would astonish you that how impenetrable it is. And Gail is the only one here who would understand it. But we will not do that. I will close now.
Thank you, Clint. That was fabulous update. Do you all want to? Should we save questions for the end so Gail has enough time, or how do you want to do it? Yes. Sure. Wait. Go ahead. Gail, why don't we make sure you have enough time? I've been writing down little comments and questions, so we can do that at the end. So I will let Gail go ahead and take it away.
Well, give me an idea of how much time or what limits I should have.
Well, you know, we've been, it depends on the group. So we've been trying to keep it, can you hear me? You froze. Yeah. Or did I freeze? Can you? Okay, you're okay now. It might have been my internet. We've been trying to keep it close to an hour total, but last week we did an hour and a half. So I would just say, do what you need to do, what you think's important. I would say about, 20, he did about 25 minutes or a half hour. Does that sound good? Okay.
I'll do less than that. How about that? See if I can give myself a little timer here, and then I'll be good to go. All right. So I'm just going to start from the top down, and I'm going to give the same disclaimer that Clint gave, which is I'm not an expert on everyone's positions. With respect to climate and environment, I did a couple of different things. I looked at, mostly looked on the web, looked at candidates' web pages, what they thought was important, and then some statements about them in the media. So I'm just going to go. So we all know our commander-in-chief doesn't believe in climate change. He's repeatedly questioned climate science, whether human activity is responsible, sorry. He wants fossil fuel domestic production and rolled back a lot of environmental regulations like Clint talked about, and NEPA is incredibly important. Was that passed under Nixon? Is that
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
So
Richard Nixon.
yeah, one, I would say he's fairly conservative, and and pulled us out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Joe Biden, as he puts right on his webpage that climate change is an existential threat, which I'm glad that he acknowledges that in such strong terms, because that's what I think. And he also says, and I know AOC was part of the group that looked at what his environment climate statement would be. The Green New Deal is crucial framework for meeting climate challenges. He says he will ensure that the US achieve 100% clean energy economy and net zero emissions no later than 2050, which of course is what's in the climate scientists are telling us is important. And he's going to stand up to polluters who disproportionately harm communities of color and low-income communities. So he's thinking about climate justice, which is very, very important. And of course, in this time of COVID, we know that people who live in polluted areas are disproportionately affected by COVID. So go on to our Senate one. So between those two, Joe Biden certainly is much more supportive of climate and the environment. In the Senate, Cory Gardner, he doesn't doubt that pollution contributes to climate change. And that's something interesting that I had heard, is that people, when you're talking about climate, people are much more receptive to the concept of reducing pollution as opposed to greenhouse gas emissions. It just says more to people. So just as a talking point, and climate change is again one of those words that provokes a reaction, but our changing climate sounds a little bit kinder and gentler. So again, if you're talking to people, you may want to talk about, we want to try and reduce our pollution, and we're concerned about our changing climate. Just some things to think about. So he does, like I said, he says that climate change is real, and this was in the Colorado Sun back in December of 2018. But he hasn't, he's either not supported or come out against tougher emissions regulations for both carbon dioxide and methane. He gets oil and gas industry. He supports clean energy, but not to the detriment of jobs. He's one of those, and Tipton says this too, all of the above strategy when he's dealing with energy. Look at coal, oil, nuclear, natural gas, renewable energy. He has funded and is a pretty strong advocate for NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. I think that's in Boulder. I could be wrong. It might be Fort Collins, Boulder. Okay. So that's a positive. He thinks that energy efficiencies are good, and he wants reliable, affordable energy. He does not support placing a fee on carbon. He thinks that we can reduce emissions, combat climate change, and grow the economy, which I agree with that statement, but I'm not sure that since he doesn't support a fee on carbon, he's going to get there. He's protected lands, the Canyon of the Ancients. Let's see. He has voted 5 times to stop the EPA from regulating major climate change pollutants. which I'm assuming refers to methane. And he did sponsor the Great American Outdoors Act, which is a significant thing. And I sort of look at that as that shows our power. He is concerned about re-election, and as a result of that, the Senate passed that bill. They would not have passed that bill otherwise, and he was a sponsor of that bill. So we achieved something just being here, even though he's a Republican senator. So we do have power, and it does make a difference. So that's what I have to say about him. John Hickenlooper, so he's saying, well, why isn't Washington politicians doing something to combat climate change? He thinks it's the defining issue and challenge of our time. He wants to transition just 100% renewable energy economy with net zero emissions by 2050. So that's good. And an interim goal of 43% reduction by 2030, below the 2005 greenhouse gas emissions. He supports rejoining the Paris Accord, investment in climate technological research, reinvent transportations, develop a workforce into green jobs, with retraining for the oil and gas industry. He supports a carbon fee and dividend. And if you don't know what that is, I'm certainly willing to email or chat with anyone about that. But basically, it's putting a fee on carbon, making people pay for the use of carbon that happens to our air. And he supports the outdoors. He knows that the outdoor industry is very, very important to Colorado. So he's a pragmatic politician, and he knows that economy is important. I mean, it is. We all have to live. We all have to support ourselves. So we've got to have money there. But he knows it's good to quantify how much the outdoors and outdoor recreation supports our economy, because then other people will support it. He opposes selling off federal lands, wants to address the maintenance backlog, and he supports passing the CORE Act, which is what Clint had talked about, the Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy Act, which would help preserve that 400,000 acres of public lands. Moving on to our U.S. House of Representatives, we have Diane Mitz-Bush. She again is also concerned about climate change, and talks about reduced snowpack, drought, catastrophic wildfires, that they're all climate induced. And she wants to expand protections like the methane rule. She wants to end fossil fuel subsidies, which would be wonderful, and use that money to support renewable energy and strengthen incentives for renewables, and make sure that corporate polluters are held accountable, and fight efforts to privatize public lands. Lauren Boebert, she has a one-page issue page on her website. She does not support the Green New Deal, supports limited government, and the presidential power to fire government employees who are not implementing the president's policies. Of course, that would mean in this current administration, people who are breaking the law, because there's things like NEPA that have to be followed. But that's about all she has. Feels, the free and fair markets would work if we let them, which, a carbon fee and dividend could fall under that. It does fall under that, doesn't just could. But that's about all she says. She doesn't have anything specific with respect to climate or the environment. Barbara McLaughlin, she talks about the environment, and she understands that wildfires show that we've got to address climate change. And if people aren't seeing that, I mean, the smoke we had here and the fires aren't even close, and we're all staying inside because of the smoke. I can't even imagine being on the West Coast right now. It would just be awful. And she's also concerned with those diminishing water supplies. And part of that is she doesn't want all water to be diverted over to the Front Range, and is going to work on that, and wants to protect our public lands, and work in a bipartisan fashion to prevent the selling or development of public lands. She's also going to have a town hall on climate action on Tuesday, September 15th. And I can give you an email if you're interested in that. I'll put it in the chat. that you can get in touch with Nathan at conservationcolorado.org if you're interested in attending that. It's not a campaign event. It is a town hall as our representative. So doing her job. And let's see. Again, wildfires. Trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, okay. That's just describing the town hall that she's going to do. Her opponent, I couldn't pull her name off of the top of my head, is Marilyn Harris. She's out of Archuleta County. What she writes on her website is District 59 is rich with an abundance of natural resources, providing unique lifestyles for residents and fantastic recreational opportunities for residents and visitors. She doesn't mention public lands or climate other than that. But again, that idea of recreational opportunities, and we've got to preserve our public lands, that's a really good hook to talk to our public servants about. County commissioners. I'm going to start with, now everyone knows we get to vote for 2 of these people, but only 1 from each district. So District 3, we have Matt Salka and Charlie Minkler. Matt talks about, and I didn't talk to him personally, protecting the environment is important to him. And he helped bring recycling and bear-proof or bear-resistant containers to Bayfield. And that's all that I saw from him on his website. And like I said, I didn't talk to him. Charlie Minkler, who's also District 3, he's a rancher and a builder, and he's supportive of agriculture and preserving the agricultural way of life in La Plata County. He doesn't have any specific statements about renewable or clean energy or developing jobs in that area. And then in District 2, we have Marcia Porter Norton and Jack Turner. And Marcia is looking at, one of her goals is to diversify our economy and looking to modern, clean energy technologies, as well as local food, agriculture, and timber products, and sustainable outdoor recreation. So all of that tells me she's looking at the environment when she's talking about that. And she wants, she notes that overall we're moving to renewable clean energy because it's cheaper, and that La Plata County can be a leader in that on the western slope. And there's a tie between renewable energy and diversifying our local economy. And she wants to work collaboratively at the community level for developing a clean energy plan, and also for making solar facilities, making that permitting process easier and more efficient, and consider solar panels on county buildings, depending on the building, and reduce, energy efficiencies, reduce the county energy consumption, and looking at smart growth where we have economic development, but we're maintaining our clean air and water, and maintaining our public lands. Promote community sustainable agriculture, which I think is very good. There's at least one, there's James Ranch and Tierra Vida Farms, who both do regenerative agriculture, which is helping to sequester carbon in the soil, which is wonderful. And then supports local control and community rights with respect to oil and gas drilling. Jack Turner, he doesn't think climate is a hoax, and he's concerned about what's going on with climate and the weather. He's supportive of LPA's mission. He made a statement at the LPA board meeting that I had attended. And he hopes that, hopefully someday we can power everything or almost everything with renewable energy. He supports, for priority for county facilities, solar powered heating, cooling, energy efficient machinery, appliances. What's LUC? Is that the land use code? Okay. He wants additional incentives for energy efficiency buildings. And I think that's what I have. So that's all I've got.
That's great. Oh, you guys are fabulous. What an update.
Thank you. Gail.
I want to mention one thing, since you mentioned the fires. My son, as we speak, is on the way from Portland, the middle of Portland, and they said it was so bad, and they were on stage 1 evacuation, and they're on their way to Colorado, to Durango, with the whole family, 4 kids and 2 dogs. So hoping that they stay here a week and the weather will improve in a week. But anyway, it's amazing to think of. I'm gonna just mention in the chat that Carolyn asked to clarify the NEPA is National Environment Policy Act.
Yeah, Clint did that for me. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And then there's some other chat information. Karen talked about Rural Colorado Climate Action with Barbara McLaughlin, Tuesday, September 15th at 6 p.m. Zoom. And that Matt Solka was instrumental in bringing a water treatment plant to Bayfield at no cost due to grants. Karen, you're a wealth of information. She clarified the LPEA board. I will ask, does anyone know if the status of Gwen Unger? Have we heard? We've requested that, we've sent out a CTA on that, requesting that he replace the other Jack Turner, not the county commissioner, the one candidate. Does anyone know? Gail?
I believe that candidates had to apply by Friday, and then they're going to vote at the next meeting, which would be on Wednesday. And I think, it's the committee of the whole is meeting on Monday or Tuesday. Maybe they're going to do interviews. I don't know, but it should be voted on, I think, next week on Wednesday.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. We got one response from a real estate person after
Co-op?
What's that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm yelling. I'm yelling at Kirby.
Oh,
Anyway, about the LPA thing, Kirby had sent out a bunch of emails requesting people to send emails in support of why it would be great to put Gwen back on the board rather than someone new or who hasn't. So they probably will still take supportive emails this weekend if you want. I'll put the address to address Britt Bassett in the chat.
great. And yeah, I did get a response from Rachel Landis for my letter my email that I sent, my personal email. So that was good. I'm sure she would be supportive of him being on there. I got a response from a realtor who said no. So that kind of gives you some good information. So, okay. And then, Gail, thanks. If you're interested in attending the town hall with Barbara McLaughlin, email Nathan at conservationco.org. So, okay. It's 5 o'clock. Are you okay to keep going with any questions?
Sure.
Oh, everybody all right? If you need to get off, just get off. That's fine too.
I don't know. There's a nice left to right break on those waves behind Karen. She might want to get out there with her boogie board. I don't want to keep her too much.
Oh, we can't hear you, Karen. Unmute.
I didn't know it would be moving. It's pretty cool. It comes with the program. You can
It is cool. That's a great one. Yeah, we're ready to surf out there.
That's where people in Oregon are going, by the way. I mean, my niece is in Salem, Kirby's brother's in Salem, and the only option they have now is some of the coastline. It's,
Unbelievable.
yeah, it's bad.
Speaking of fire, I did have a question, Clint. You mentioned, now I'm trying to remember who it was when we were talking about they were cutting juniper trees. It was the BLM.
BLM's plans to do some landscape changes.
So were they using the excuse of fire mitigation?
That's one of the excuses. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
You know, the main excuse is, yeah, creating fuel breaks, watershed improvement, improving big game habitat and livestock grazing. And of course, the methods that they use for doing all this, I mean, you guys have seen some of the stuff that they do. They, you know, bulldozer chaining, you know, mastication with heavy machinery, salvage logging and brush hogging. But here's the interesting thing I didn't report on. The Wild Utah Project has done a study on some of these projects that BLM has done in the past in order to create fuel breaks and other things. And what they have found is that for 2/3 of the landscapes treated, there is non-significant or negative effects, including cheatgrass invasions and continued decline of sage grouse. And then for 1/3 of the landscapes treated, the conditions actually get worse. And of course, all of those efforts are destructive to fragile cryptobiotic communities, which allows for the soil to be lifted up in dust storms, to settle on our snowfields, and hasten runoff problems that we're experiencing in Colorado. So that's a long answer to your question, Deb.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And then I had one other question. When we sent out the call to action, we got a response from a ID member, who wanted to educate Clint and Indivisible Durango on our lack of understanding. Is that correct? On that helium, that we needed to be able to explore helium in Utah. Yes. I think. You want to talk? Did you look into that at all or respond to him?
You know, I thought his letter was very interesting. This was a guy who has a helium company here in the Four Corners, and you know, it was such a thinly disguised, honestly arrogant attitude that he was putting forward, and he signed off, you know, humbly. What did he say? He said, you know, humbly. So-and-so. Well, I didn't get the humble part out of it at all. He was pointing out that we were misguided in our opposition to oil and gas development in southern Utah, because some of it is helium development, and helium is not a greenhouse gas and does not cause those kinds of issues, and that we would be better off, you know, focusing our efforts elsewhere. And obviously this is his business, and so he doesn't consider the industrial development of even a helium operation to be an impact on the landscape that we might be concerned about.
And he might be listening to this, and we appreciate your interest, and he was very supportive of Indivisible Durango, but it would be really, yeah, interesting, and if he has any more comments, certainly can let us know, and we'll send it to you, Clint, and then you guys can have a discussion.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, and I think that's all we have in the chat. If you have another question, you could put one in the chat. Well, that was so thorough. You guys, thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and we'll put this, hopefully it still says recording, so we hope to send this out, and probably on the next invitation for week number 5, and then we can put the link for this recording as well. So that then that goes out to about 900 people. So that's would be great. Doug says informative, looking forward to the future editions. Thanks, Doug. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'm gonna stop recording.